professor Enzo Pace, che è stato docente di sociologia delle religioni all'Università di Padova, direttore degli studi della Scuola di Alti Studi in Scienze Sociali di Parigi, nonché presidente dell'International Society of Sociology of Religion e coordinatore della sezione di sociologia della religione dell'Associazione Italiana di Sociologia. Studia i movimenti carismatici nel cristianesimo contemporaneo e quelli di tipo fondamentalista nelle grandi religioni mondiali. Inoltre si è interessato della sociologia dell'Islam e più recentemente della religione digitale e del fenomeno delle mega church. Tra le sue ultime pubblicazioni, Cristianesimo extra large, Religious Diversity in a Pluralistic Society, Sociologia delle religioni, Religiosità popolare nella società post-secolare, Nuovi approcci teorici e nuovi campi di ricerca. Ha recentemente pubblicato Diversità e pluralismo religioso, modelli e mappe per l'editore Pazzini nel 2021. Ecco, io do la parola al professor Enzo Pace, grazie per aver aderito, è sempre un amico molto fedele e generoso, grazie davvero Vincenzo. E lascio la parola a lui, l'intervento del professor Pace sarà in lingua inglese e si userà le slide che vedete alle vostre spalle. Grazie. Ecco, 30 minuti di intervento e cerchiamo di rispettare un po' questi tempi. Grazie.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. And perhaps I have to remember that with the Irene group, we had a first meeting last year. And so welcome once again in Venice. So my presentation is a sort of, how to say, so the main focus of my presentation is precisely on the title of the first slide that remind a book I edited with a group of research, Portugal, Sweden, Norway, and Spain on the impact of the migration to European societies, particularly on the transformation of the religious landscape in Europe. Okay, there's a joke in the bracket. You remember perhaps the very famous movie by Pedro Almodóvar, Al borde de un ataque de nervos. Europe seems to me sometimes a sort of on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of this flow of migrants and the effects that this presence of newcomers has on the social fabric, including the religious social fabric. So, since the Berlin Wall, Europe received an increasing number of migrants. Of course, you know, migrants arrived in various waves. The first profile of these newcomers was as worker, particularly in the year 60s, 70s. But we know that this first profile has met a superimposition of other profiles: the hungry, the persecuted by wars, the desperate who lost all means of subsistence because of climate changes. Just to if you look at the map of the Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and look the Chad Lake, you perceive the disaster that provoked the expulsion of millions of people from this area. They discriminated by gender. Afghanistan is one of the most important cases. The minor with no future at home, and so on. So, in this way, I could conclude with this very provocative sentence. In any case, in spite of the frontiers, in spite of the wars that in Europe many governments built in the last 10 years, God needs no passport. In other words, in any case, the main focus of our analysis is precisely the great transformation of Europe, and particularly the European religious landscape. And although, how to say, official and historical religions that shaped the cultural identity of many European societies, religion persisted longer in Nordic Protestant countries than in South Mediterranean countries, and although the levels of secularization, or better, perhaps we have to clarify suddenly this traditional formula we used, particularly in Europe, secularization perhaps is not appropriate up to now. Perhaps I prefer to speak about individualization of the religious choices, of course, in respect, in relation to religious institution. Secularization in this sense means de-institutionalization of the religiosity into emergence of a new area of spirituality, religious bricolage or boutinage, and so on. So in this sense, Europe becomes an open-air laboratory which to experiment with intelligent ways of managing society with high linguistic, cultural, and religious diversity. Just to give an example, extra-European example, but it involved precisely in European history. We are in Tunisia, in the place, in the city of Zarzis, in the southern part of Tunisia, where we can observe this, how to say, intelligent and merciful example from this deep south of Mediterranean. You have on the first slide the Rashid Quraishi is a Franco-Algerian artist who created in Zarzis a multi-religious cemetery, of course, where to give a worthy burial to the many migrants who died at sea during the crossing. It opened in June to 2021, and the name is Le Jardin d'Afrique, the Garden of the Africa. Al-Jinnah al-Ifriqiya. Jinnah al-Ifriqiya is the paradise in the Quran. So, and the idea is very interesting because Zarzis is one of the places where, after the crossing movement through the Africa, many people arrived. They tried to negotiate the passage to the Lampedusa, to Malta, Cyprus, and so on. And just to give an example of this intelligent and merciful idea, he decided to try to identify people who died and to recognize the religious belonging. And when he is able to identify, how to say, these people, these men, these women are Muslim, there's a section of the cemetery. You can look the main entrance after the yellow gate. There's a very wonderful corridor with this elements that belongs to the traditional art craft of in Tunisia. On the one side, there's a plantation of olives, particularly 5 olives, that these are 5 pillars of Islam. And on the other side, you have 12 fruit trees, is 12 apostles. In this sense, you have a man who has a cultural Muslim background, who knows very well French culture, that invented a multi-faith space to provide a worthy burial for these poor people. Of course, this is not very far from Jerba, where there's one of the ancient synagogues of the Maghreb. There are some protests here because after the shipwreck in September 22, there was a protest against the government, the Tunisian government. One of the very interesting, how to say, effect of this circulation of stereotypes in Europe, from the Europe to southern of Mediterranean, is the last public discourse by the president of Tunisia. He said we have to resist to this process of substitution of the population of Tunisian. There's a political strategy to cancel our Arab Muslim identity. The same discourse like Andy Breivik in Norway when he killed 79 younger people in Utoya Island in Norway in July, and so on. Say it's the circulation, how to say, stupidity, because of course, when you have this historical process of transformation of the society, you have to govern this process, not to criminalize or to represent this process like a sort of design of the devil. So, I have to run. My first assumption in this case is to introduce the distinction between religious diversity and religious pluralism, because religious diversity is a social fact, empirically observable. You can describe this social fact in every European society, and you have to. This is the most important remark. We have to distinguish this idea from the idea of religious pluralism, because religious pluralism concerns precisely one of the core of the Irene project: how to manage, what's the governance of this transformation, the great transformation of European society, from legal point of view, educational, constitutional, cultural, and so on. In this sense, if we adopt or assume this distinction, we are able to compare concrete cases in Europe. I have not much time to illustrate the first one, but it's for me it's one of the interesting case I studied in the 10 years ago. And the problem of governance concerns precisely the combination of two targets, two goals. On one hand, we have to transform this transformation in a new bonding capital or a bridging capital, social capital. You can transform this new presence in a sort of reproduction in a different scale of 1, 2, 3, 4 ghettos, inaugurate a new apartheid in Europe, in a segregation in some neighborhoods, and so it is, in this sense, it's correlated to the process of the reinforcing ideologically the social, the bonding social capital, no? To reinforce, to reconstruct the national identity, but of course, stressing the difference between your identity and the other identities. But because of the others are a plurality of identity, the problem is the governance of this process means perhaps to cope with a resurgent cultural religious conflicts in Europe. We don't need other conflicts in Europe. We have accumulated so many conflicts in the past, including the Shoah. You have to remember always that the Shoah is the disaster, the collapse of the European culture. So, if I just to give an example, if you look back for Bradford, in United Kingdom, you have this plurality of presence established in this city. Then you have this idea when you look at the Bradford case, but you can look at what's happening in Birmingham, in Manchester, and then, of course, in Germany, in many German cities, in Spain, and in Italy too, or in Greece, and so on. When you look at it, it's very interesting to refresh this concept introduced in 2007 by Stephen Bertowitz. He was a former director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study for Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Göttingen. This concept denotes increased diversity not only between immigrant and ethnic minority. It's a useful concept because obliges us to escape from this dichotomic approach, we and other. But we know we have an internal diversity as well as the others. Super diversity means precisely this idea that also in Muslim community, Buddhist community, Hindus community, Sikh community, we have to cope with the internal diversity. In some, this dichotomic polarization is not very useful. We have to change the lens and to look at what's happening within this community. In this sense, applying to religious field the idea that there's a diversity of religious diversities. Of course, it means managing this kind of society implies the assumption a complex approach. These societies are a complex society, differentiated and in permanent process of adaptation, readaptation, negotiation, renegotiation, not only between us and others, but within each new cultural and religious community. I could only remind that this Bradford is an open-air laboratory to observe precisely this process of transformation of diversity of religious diversity into a social capital, a new social capital, a bridging social capital, investing particularly this capital, invested particularly this capital into educational system. I have not time to remind what's happened when the political authority of this city realized the social change occurring in the society, and they decide to create this permanent infrastructure, the sort of consultants of the mayor of the city in order to find out good best practice that transform the religious difference in bridging capital. And of course, if you look at how many languages they speak in Bradford, it's the same what's happening not only in Bradford now, but all over in Europe, including little village in this region, in Veneto. There's the little village in Italy means also 70,000 inhabitants. But when in this village you have 25, 27 people coming from 80 different countries all over the world, these people speak perhaps more or less Italian, but they speak English, French, and then Punjabi, Bengali, Hindu, how to say, the language of Pakistan, Pashtun, and so on. The same in other countries. And when we look at the differentiation of religious landscape in Bradford, we are waiting for the last national census. But if we compare this two block of data coming from the national census in 2001 and 2011, you can perceive, of course, persisting, how to say, cultural and religious framework of the identity of the people, Christianity, but you have a differentiation with other presence, in Buddhist, Hindu, and so on. This is the list of how many places of worship they are present in Bradford. So the creation of this institution produced two very important things. One of these syllabus for religious education. This was a cooperative public-private project that involve not only theologians, teachers, experts in different religions, but also, and pupils, of course, but also families. It's one of the most interesting social effects of this investment, that also the family have been involved as how to say, protagonist, actors of this project. You can study Bradford according to this idea. They were able, more or less, to transform a social fact, religious diversity, into a not good, but a management of this diversity with some practical outcomes, starting perhaps from the, to say, the best starting point, precisely education, a sort of co-education, starting from the school in order to co-educate families, adults, religious leaders, and so on. So, if you compare this case with another case, Denmark, of course, there's a strange case in Denmark when the government ruled by a liberal party, decide to introduce a new law to impose the symbolic gesture to shake the hand before the major when foreigners received the citizenship. Because there were 5 or 6 cases of some migrants who refused to shake hand, a man who refused to shake hand of the women as mayor, and vice versa. Only 5, 6, but it was a scandal. In the parliament, they approved this rule, and you can read the rationale of this decision. We must accept the basic rules of a society where we are all equal. Okay. To those who say they can shake the hand of someone of the other sex, I say they have not understood what it means to be Danish. Perhaps you have to take seriously in consideration this argument, but perhaps there's another idea, that this dichotomic polarization, we and us. We and other. If I show you, of course, is the one of the episode in a chain of events occurred in this society since 2005 with this how to say, series of satirical cartoons about Mohammed in the Jyllands-Posten. There was, of course, protest, but you remember this case. But the most recent bill introduced, one is the so-called From Anti-Ghetto Law to 2018, revised in 2019, to the placement of asylum seekers in waiting camps located out of the Danish border in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Tunisia. Of course, paying the government of these states to host these asylum seekers. On one hand, you have these rules that children from 1 year of age will be taken from 25 hours in a week to special schools where they will learn the Danish language and the values. Okay, Danish language I could understand, but values is so problematic. And in June 2021, Parliament passed amendment to Alliance Act that forces the transfer of asylum seekers outside the European border and externalization of asylum procedure and refugee protection. But this is the reality, the social reality of the Danish society. You know, if we look at the number, how much religious diversity within Danish society, you know, there are, of course, out of the 360,000 residents of immigrant origin, it means, of course, perhaps in percentage is higher, is quite 6% of population coming from 20 countries, but still quite 50% of people come from 7 European countries. And the estimation of people who has, how to say, a cultural, religious Muslim origin are more or less 129,000 people. Coming from, when you look at the list of countries where these people came, you can find Afghanistan, Bosnia, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Somalia, and Turkey. Now, the majority came from Turkey. Okay. So, in my idea that we have to look at least 3 indicators in order to understand what happens when we move from the social fact to the politics, from the religious diversity as fact to religious diversity as object of policies of integration, recognition, and transformation of this difference in bringing social capital. One indicator is religious freedom. Of course, there's a factual element, is the analysis of the policies concerning the place of worship. You have to study in a comparative term the law, the national law in Europe, in order to understand what's the strategies to locate this place of worship, where if they respect some rules and so on and so on and so on. Second element is the idea that of recognition of the new Ministry of Cults. According to the variety of legislation in Europe, in France, there's a discussion about the recognition of the Imam as Minister of Cult. In Germany, they were able to rule in a very modern way. It is recognition. In Italy, we are a preliminary discussion. We started to discuss about the statute of this ministry only 3 years ago, and so on. Third is precisely this educational system. Of course, this transformation has impact directly on the variety of historical experience to teaching religion at school, in public school particularly. And the investment of this sector is another indicator that reveals the will of a political establishment to rule this process, not to ignore this process. Coping with, of course, the two elements. On one hand, you have this increasing number of small groups, political parties against the Islamization of Europe. But on the other hand, you have a very other alternative sign. Last year, there was the first inauguration of the first foundation of the House of One in Berlin, this multi-faith worship. Of course, we need all this kind of experience. Multi-faith worship perhaps is not in the future of this European society, but in this moment it's an important educational investment in order to promote the idea that, of course, intelligent and merciful society is a society that is able to transform the religious differences in a, how to say, new values in order to promote social transformation of society in a peaceful way. Thank you very much.